Studium to Studio with your local lay Dominicans, we'll be discussing some of the gems we discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
Michael Totaro.
And today we're going to talk about something, it sounds very complex, but we're going to try to, share some of the things that in studying the four causes, which is what we're going to get into, that help us to understand God better. So, Mike, do you want to kick us off with these four causes?
Sure. Yeah. So, Cheryl, we talked about this in other segments of our program, and that is, we were created by God for God, and we know that our faith tells us that we can love God more and more by way of coming to know Him better. Because, and I don't remember if it's a single saint, but this has been written by at least one saint, but maybe more. But, it is difficult to love that which we do not know. And so we can come to know God better because we can't actually see Him as He is, right? That's for hopefully later. But we can come to know Him indirectly through creation. And so we have also had various segments in which this notion of the intelligent design of the universe, well, the intelligent designer is God Himself. And so in our discussion today, we're going to look at some, sort of dimension or perspective of that intelligent design. And I think that hopefully by way of the Holy Spirit, we will help our listeners to have a better idea about something that we have come across, I think, in reading various writings of saints and theologians and even popes, but the four causes of St. Thomas Aquinas.
So these four causes, why is it important that we understand this? Because, we can, read a lot of philosophy books and get into the deepness of causality. Why is that important for us?
So it actually all begins with Aristotle. And so it's a reminder to our listeners that where St. Augustine drew heavily from Plato, who was Aristotle's teacher, St. Thomas Aquinas drew heavily from Aristotle. So this all really begins with Aristotle, and it's just that St. Thomas Aquinas really kind of brought it to the fore and was able to integrate it within our faith. And so just to kind of address your question, Jeff, let's just think of a statue, okay? So Aristotle might have asked himself, well, I'm looking at the statue, why is this a statue? And so Aristotle, in addressing that question, he can give four sorts of answers. So he can say, well, this is a statue because it is made of marble, because it is in the shape of, let's say, King David, because Michelangelo sculpted it, he was the sculptor, and because Michelangelo wanted to depict the figure of David in marble, okay, sort of the purpose behind it. And maybe he needed money as well. I don't know. He was doing it for pay, I guess. We don't know. But an account of each kind of cause is important for a fully scientific account of whatever a philosopher is explaining. And remember, a philosopher asks questions, not necessarily with any sort of utilitarian usefulness objective, but just to ask the question, why this and not that or whatever. Okay, so Aristotle actually developed his account of the four causes from his analysis of change. And I would like to also kind of, which is used a lot, so this is certainly not my example, but quite often a table is used as an example. So if we take a table, okay, let's look at the matter of the table, which is more formally called the material cause. Well, the material cause or matter of the table is the wood that's used to build the table. The form of the table or formal cause, okay, it's the design or structure that makes it a table. I mean, it has 4 legs, it has a tabletop, and so on and so forth. Thirdly, we have the source, or more formally, the efficient cause, the carpenter, who actually constructs the table. And finally, we have the final cause, or the end, which is simply the purpose of the table. Okay, so the purpose is to serve food, drinks, or whatever. So that's sort of something that I would like to ask our listeners to kind of keep in mind. We'll kind of refer back to that along the way, but it gives us some tangible frame of reference as we continue with our discussion.
Yeah, and I think, for those of you who ever, gotten into a small group or, a little discussion group, it always comes up, so why are we here? What are we doing? What is our purpose? And I don't know if Plato and Aristotle and others were just kind of hanging around having a beer and trying to figure out why they were here. But that is the case. I mean, I think a lot of us as humans, we want to better understand our purpose, because so many people are like, well, what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? And I think it's really informative to go back to the basics to understand, these causes, and we better understand intelligent design. So I think, it's really, really important for us to have just a basic understanding of it, and just appreciate you doing this. So how can we make this next step now that we know the 4 causes?
Okay, so we've identified the 4 causes, and so as kind of a sort of preliminary to understanding the 4 causes, we kind of need to just have a basic notion about change. Okay, so Aristotle undertook an analysis of change. The challenge for him, by the way, Aristotle, was that he had to somehow confront the sort of what at that time was considered the ironclad logic of Parmenides, who was also a pre-Socratic philosopher. And Parmenides basically asserted that in reality there is no change whatsoever. Okay, that all change is mere appearance. Reality is one, and this one, by the way, one with a capital O, which only is unchanging. So what we, at least according to Parmenides, what we perceive as change is not real change in a literal sense. The problem, however, is that Parmenides did not have this idea or notion of potency. So you've got potency and you've got actual. Potency, actual. Okay. Parmenides had argued that there are only 2 alternatives for anything: being and non-being. And so no new being can come from non-being, since, quote, nothing comes from nothing. Nor can new being come from being, since what has being already is and does not begin to be. So being cannot come from being, since it is already. So Aristotle had to. The bottom line is he had to struggle with that.
Right.
Okay.
And it's something that everybody's still struggling with.
Yes.
Whenever we hear being and, potentiality, actuality, act,
Right.
and everything, it seems difficult to understand.
And I would actually agree that it is. I mean, it really is because it's not like something like, Jeff, you mentioned the Plato and Aristotle sitting around enjoying a beer together. It's not lightweight discussion, and yet it's not the subject matter is not something upon which like it's going to make or break our day, but it's just because we have intellect,
Right.
and God gives us the ability to come to know and understand things better. And we know that as our faith tells us that creation is beautiful. God saw all that he had created and saw that it was all very good. Well, then it seems that it's a very noble thing for us and the Christian thing for us to come to know as much of God's creation and to understand sort of the essences of that as best we can. Imperfect as it may be, but still it brings us ever closer to an understanding of God.
Yeah, I think without the Christian mind, or without Saint Thomas, once again a wonderful Dominican, you go back to the early ages of Plato, and it would be no big deal to say, well, of course you can't create nothing, there's something out of nothing, but what Christianity did and our Judeo-Christian beliefs is kind of turn that on its head. Is that if you want to look at the great mover, that moved because everything had to have a beginning, and this is where they struggled to try to find that, meaning Plato, but Aristotle began down that road of there had been some sort of mover in terms of creation. And of course we understand God as the great mover, the great creator, because he did create something out of nothing. And of course that's where we have our get our great intellect from, and be able to move to that next step, which is understanding obviously the changes. And tell us more about that.
Yeah, so just one final, of course there's a lot more that can be said, but just to kind of cap off this brief look at change. So what Aristotle did, which went beyond Parmenides, was basically the following. It is true that nothing can come from nothing. Now remember, when we say that God creates everything from nothing, God is not nothing. God is God, But while it is true that nothing can come from nothing, it is not entirely true that being cannot come from being. So to cap this off, one needs to distinguish between being in potency and being in act. So potency is that which something can be, but is not yet that. Being in act is what it is. So God, for example, is the infinite being in act.
The I am, the great I am.
Exactly, right. God, there is no potency, because God is. There is no change in God. He is. And so from being in potency, there can come being in act, and that's sort of what Aristotle that was the beginning of his beginning to develop a framework for the four causes. So just to save time, we will have to jump past one other dimension of change, and it's called accidental change. And I just want to make mention of it only because when sometimes when someone is reading about the accidental change, it seems weird because the terminology is just not intuitive for us. Accidental change does not imply that there's oops, like this happened, just oopsie, kind of thing. Accidental is not a change in essence, but it's sort of like if you a simple example might be painting that table, from red to blue or whatever. It's not an ugly table, blue, but anyway, that would be more of an accidental change. So there's no substantial change, right? It still is the table. It's just that what has changed is sort of cosmetic thing. So just that would probably be another program. So if we now move into the actual four causes, let's begin with material cause. So before undergoing the change, whatever it is, it is in potency to a new determination. Then under the action of an efficient source, what we will talk about later, the efficient cause. So you've got the material cause, the matter. So the matter would be, again, going back to our table analogy, the wood of the table. The efficient cause would be the carpenter. So through the efficient cause or source, the wood receives a new actualization, right? It becomes a table by way of the carpenter who gives it legs and a tabletop and so on and so forth. And similarly with respect to, say, the marble that the sculptor works with. So the marble upon which the sculptor works is in potency. It's just a block of marble. It's in potency to receiving the new determination which the sculptor gives it, and the new determination is the form of the statue. Okay, now, so when we talk about material cause, we have to do so by also pulling in these other causes, the formal cause and the efficient cause, as I'm doing now. So the example of marble receiving the form of the statue is an example of accidental change, because again, the nature of the marble, it's still marble. Okay, so there's no change in the marble. It's not like having the elements sodium and chloride, each of which are unique things, but when you combine them, you have salt. Okay, so there are cases of substantial change or cases of new substances coming to be. So Aristotle basically calls this kind of change generation and corruption. So if we eat an apple, for example, well, the apple at some point stops being an apple and it becomes part of us. Okay, so there is a corruption there because the apple was an apple. It's no longer an apple. Okay, the death of an animal. So the animal was in one moment living, and then it dies. So now it is dead. Okay, so that's an example of sort of corruption. Okay, so basically Aristotle postulated that there is an ultimate stuff or material. That's why we're talking about matter that underlies the potency of everything, and so something can take that matter and make it become something. That's the form. Okay. So again, we're still focused on the material cause, but we remember that the matter is a potential to become something, but that something depends upon what the form is. So again, the form, a table, it has a certain structure, legs, tabletop, and that sort of thing. So we call that ultimate stuff, Aristotle called that ultimate stuff prime matter. Prime matter. It is only and always found with some substantial form that gives it determination. So they really have to come together, basically. So digression for a moment. So think of us as human beings. We are comprised of body and soul, matter and form. The body without soul is a dead body. It's not human. It takes the form of the formal cause or substance to take the matter and make it, in the case of a human being, alive, a living human being. Okay, and we need to recognize that prime matter is real. It is a real principle of change. It is the real potency that every material thing in the universe must undergo to bring about change, okay, by way of the form. Okay. Now, we also want to make clear that we're not talking about like two things that are kind of floating just floating around and they come together. We're not speaking about, these kinds of sort of abstract thing. I guess they are sort of abstractions. It's a way to explain sort of, why this is a table, why that's a statue, why we're human beings. Okay. And so again, the bottom line is we begin with prime matter. Okay. This then takes us to, and by the way, there are many implications from this that really can apply to science. Because in science, if we talk about modern nuclear physics, well, at the end of the day, basically ultimately boils down to you've got physical and energy, some physical components and energy, okay? And so they can be converted between some physical matter and energy and vice versa. So there is, at the very least, even from the scientist's point of view, a theoretical need for the notion of prime matter.
Great. You are listening to Catholic Radio for Acadiana, and we are your Third Order Dominicans here based in Lafayette, Louisiana, and this is the program Studium to Studio, and we're bringing the fruits of our contemplation to you every Thursday at 4 p.m. thanks to Stein Lumber with locations throughout all of Acadiana. And today we are doing some explaining, I guess. We're talking about form and matter, and we're trying to understand a little bit deeper our existence. So just a little light topic here for the next 15 minutes, but
and you can get your lumber to build that table.
That's right, at Stein Lumber.
I had to take the opportunity.
That's right, yeah. And they have more than just lumber. So, so Mike, in terms of moving forward, now that we have kind of an understanding of the of causes and causality, what does that do in terms of our faith and our trying to explain the existence of God?
I think he's jumping to final cause, Mike.
Yeah, well, it's important that we have a limited amount of time, so I think we do need to sort of not overlook the opportunity to address that. And we've had other segments on this sort of, the supposed conflict between sort of, faith and reason or faith and science. And I think we're all in agreement here, and our listeners, of course, who are devout believers in the Lord and have faith, that we recognize and acknowledge the existence of God. But materialists do not. And so how can we of course, we cannot convert anyone, but the problem is when you read the writings of many materialists, such as Dawkins, and various other scientists who are pretty much materialists, although I don't think they call themselves materialists any longer. I forgot what the label is nowadays, but in any event, we can serve as instruments for God in terms of others who might become confused, even those who are Catholic, who have a deep faith, but then begin to have doubts, and then you find this particularly when a young man or woman enters university. It just depends on the university, but they may be challenged, right? Because they will be told, look, you may have faith, but let's just talk about it from a pragmatic perspective. And that is, can you measure, is God measurable? Is your soul measurable? Is your faith measurable? And these kinds of things and others can quite often cause confusion, especially with young people. So I think does it take effort to understand this? Yes. Do I fully understand it? No. So, I'm in the process of, for me, there is the potentiality of continuing to understand a little bit better. But I think I have a little bit better grasp today than I did, say 20 years ago. And so I think the practical value is that it helps us, number one, to feel more confident that we can explain our faith, and number two, when we come up across those that we interact with and they have doubts. I see it at the university quite often. Young people say, well, I was born and raised Catholic, but honestly I don't really think much about it because I'm not really convinced. I hear that all the time. Of course, that always opens the door. If it's in my office especially, well, if you'd like to talk about it, I'd be happy to discuss it with you. And I would like to be able to provide some reasonable responses to what they have been told, what they've been challenged with by others, perhaps some of their professors who claim that there is no basis for our faith, that there is the structure and organization that exists is what it is because it just sort of, that's how what it has evolved to. So there is no grand designer or prime mover, as you used the term earlier. So I think that these are practical applications for us. So again, it helps us to draw closer to the Lord. We're more confident in what we know and believe, and plus we can hopefully do a better job trying to address questions that come up, especially with young people or those who maybe not are young, but they're having doubts about our faith.
Yeah. So when young people are asking the question, well, is there a God? Many people say, well, it's really easy to show that there is a God, but some people say, well, no, it's quite easy to show that there really is no God. So in terms of what St. Thomas Aquinas did. My understanding that he came up with these 5 ways of proving the existence of God, and to remind folks about the Summa. I mean, the Summa was created, of course, and written almost in its entirety by St. Thomas Aquinas, and was required of all seminarians, thanks to Pope Leo the 13th, moving forward. And because he had an order, he had a structure to showing, from a theological standpoint and a philosophical standpoint, our faith. And so, kind of going along on what we've been talking about, do we need to talk about the existence of God and where we go from here? What did St. Thomas say?
So I'm glad you brought up the 5 proofs for the existence of God, because it turns out that St. Thomas Aquinas, I mean, I would assume that he had in his brilliant mind the idea about what the Summa was going to ultimately, how it was going to, how it would be structured, and so very early on, it's important, to sort of show that God's existence can be proved. It's provable, but we have to be careful, because it's not provable in the sort of mathematical sense. Because, to be honest with you, it really does. At the end of the day, it does involve. It is a matter of faith. But it does. But his 5 proofs for the existence of God. So 2 things on that point. First, it does show that an explanation of God's existence is reasonable. That there's no contradiction there between those 5 proofs for the existence of God. Okay, there's nothing that's contradictory about that when looking at the created and observable universe. The second point is that St. Thomas Aquinas really had to sort of think this through, the 4 causes, in order, because he makes use of these 4 causes in really most of pretty much all 5 of his proofs for the existence of God. So in other words, they are sort of prerequisite to his 5 proofs for the existence of God. So once again, we can looking at the Summa, we can turn to the Summa, point others to the Summa as showing, as demonstrating, illustrating that our faith is reasonable.
And I'd like to just add that, like we were talking about getting to the final cause, because I feel like that's the crux of everything, is that the question is why? Why do we have this table? And in its greatest, its essence, its form, is to be the best table possible, right? Mm-hmm. And which means its legs should be even, etc., right? What was it designed for? Our eyes were designed to see. Its best form is if we can see 20/20 vision, right? So we get corrected if we don't have that vision. And what are we as humans designed for? We're designed to know, love, and serve God in this world and be happy with Him in the next. And if we understand that, then we understand even more. We can become more human than we ever dreamed we could be. And that's, I think, the point we're trying to get at. And I thought it was interesting you used a statue in your example. Most people don't choose that because some people would think there's no purpose in art. And yet, as humans, we know the purpose of art is to raise our heart and minds up to God. And I'm looking, when you talked about the statue of David, I had been at the Borghese Gallery recently and saw the statue, and I'm so moved by the determination and the virtue that you can see in the face. It's very uplifting, and that's the point of art, right? So I think in the end that this is what matters. Our final cause is heaven. And if we know that, then we can grow into that, live life more abundantly that God promised us, right?
Yes.
To have life and have it more abundantly. So remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death, and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word. A shotgun blast was the last thing I heard.